The purpose of today's video is for us to build a Tyranid army list, a 2,000 point list from absolute scratch. If you're watching this video, you may be a player that's brand new to Warhammer and are thinking about playing Tyranids. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly the models you want to add to your army so that you can be competitive in the games that you play. Now, the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and add a Warlord. I'm going to recommend that you add a Hive Tyrant to your army. You go out and buy this model. We're going to go ahead and click this Warlord icon over here because the Hive Tyrant has an ability over here that we're going to take a look at called Onslaught, which reads, while a friendly Tyranid's units within 6 inches of this model, ranged weapons equipped by models in that unit have the Assault ability. Now, what you're going to notice throughout this entire video is that different Tyranid models offer the ability to give buffs to other models. So a lot of the models that we choose today are going to be models that give our models advantages, or in some cases kind of unfair advantages during the game that we play. And we need to make sure that we take advantage of each of these things because Tyranids are not models that necessarily are going to table your opponents. You're not really focusing on destroying your opponent's models. You just want to destroy key models and stay alive long enough so that you can deny your opponent points. Now, to keep our Hive Tyrant alive, we're going to go ahead and add a group of Tyrant Guard so that while we're playing, we can pair both of these models together. And the Tyrant Guard is just a tough model that your opponents have to shoot through before they're allowed to deal damage to your Hive Tyrant so that we can give that buff to our models. Now, the models that we're really focusing on buffing are some models that just got their points recently decreased that I think are incredibly effective at dealing damage to your opponents. And these are the Zoanthropes. Zoanthropes have a strength 12 weapon over here that does D6 plus 1 damage. And inside this game of 40k, people tend to bring tanks and giant models. And this weapon over here can just wipe out models. And when we're going to create this list, we're going to add 6 Zoanthropes in one group, which means 6 shots that could potentially wipe out a tank. Guys, these models are so good. We're going to add 2 in this list, but in actuality, I own 3 groups of 6. I think Zoanthropes are fantastic. These models do so much damage. They're so good. And on top of that, guys, these models also give your own models. If you look at the abilities, it says, while a friendly Tyranid's unit is within 6 inches of this unit, models in that unit have a 6-up invulnerable save. So keeping cheap filler models around this model is going to allow those cheap models to stay alive. And we talk about cheap filler models, we have to go over to Battleline, because Battleline is always going to be where we have the models that we have that are going to be abundant. And the model we're going to choose for this video are the Termagants. And we're going to choose Termagants because they're fairly easy to get a hold of and they're relatively cheap in relation to other models. So we're going to go ahead and add 20 Termagants to this list. And the sole objective of these Termagants, everybody, is to make sure that we make the Termagants go to the center of the battlefield. We need the Termagants right there so that your opponent is forced to shoot at the Termagants. Now, the reason that's important is because we're going to go ahead and make sure that we have one group of the Zoanthropes next to those Termagants so that gaining that 6-up invulnerable save. And on top of that, we're going to go ahead and add a group of Venomthropes. Now, guys, you have to make sure that you keep your Venomthropes safe. These models, this is probably the best model in the entire army because Venomthropes have an ability called Foul Spores that, long story short, gives your models the benefit of cover against an attack. So those Termagants gain the benefit of cover, and they're going to gain the stealth ability, which makes them -1 to hit when they're being shot at, which, believe it or not, everybody, that really keeps Termagants alive for extended periods of time. And the reason that's important is because while your opponents are shooting at your Termagants, trying to take them off the center objective, we get the opportunity to activate a stratagem at the beginning of our turn called Endless Swarm. Now, Endless Swarm allows us to return up to D3 plus 3 destroyed models to a selected unit. So in other words, if we lose 7 Termagants during our turn or during our opponent's turn, we can bring back 5, which is backbreaking to your opponents, man. It's kind of a feel bad, but it's really important to bring back those models because it just really soaks up so much of your opponent's damage and basically wastes their time. So always combo Termagants with the Venomthropes and a group of Zoanthropes so that they gain the 6-up invulnerable save, they're -1 to hit, they gain the benefit of cover, and you get to bring the Termagants back to life. Guys, this combo right here, just this combo right here, you could add any number of other models into this list. Forget the Hive Tyrant, forget the Tyrant Guard. Just that combo by itself will win you games. Now, you win games by scoring points in Warhammer, and one model that's really good at scoring points is a Biovore. We're going to have one Biovore in this list, and the Biovore essentially lets us drop something called a Spore Mine. Now, we can drop this Spore Mine 48 inches anywhere on the battlefield from where our Biovore is. Now, those Spore Mines are going to allow us to score secondary objectives, and the secondary objectives you're going to choose are behind the enemy lines and deploy teleport homers. And when you play the game, that'll make much more sense to you, but just remember those two secondary objectives. You're going to make sure you pick fixed objectives. Now, while you're dropping those Spore Mines in your opponent's deployment zone, we also are going to pick up 2 Ripper Swarms, which are models that have the ability called Deep Strike, so that we can take these models and place them into our opponent's backfield as well. And these models also allow us to score those secondary objectives that I just mentioned earlier. Now, to add more models that are going to create more debuffs for our opponents, we're going to add 2 Maleceptors, because Maleceptors, when we look at their abilities, it says while an enemy unit is within 6 inches of this model, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, subtract 1 from the hit roll, and if the enemy unit is below half strength, subtract 1 from the wound roll as well. Now, whenever we have the opportunity to subtract from a hit roll, it really deteriorates our opponent's ability to deal damage to us, so we always prioritize playing models that have abilities like that. Now, while we're having those Maleceptors run up the battlefield, we're also going to play 2 Exocrines as well. Exocrines are models that have D6 plus 3 attacks, and they do 3 damage each, guys. I mean, you know, you can roll as low as 4 attacks, but guys, if you land a damage 3 attack on something, it is a considerable amount of damage. And over the course of an entire game, Exocrine has the opportunity to just decimate Space Marines, decimate Terminators, and just to do a lot of damage to tanks and other things. You always, if you have the opportunity to pick up a model, pick up some Exocrines, guys, because these models at 135 points is an absolute bargain. Now, to continue to add to these debuffing abilities, we're going to go ahead and add 2 Neurolictors to our list. Now, Neurolictors are models that have Infiltrate, so that we get to place them on the battlefield 9 inches away, anywhere we want from our opponent's deployment zone. So the reason this is important is because we want to hide them in an area where they can stay safe, but they need to be within 12 inches of an opponent's model, because it reads, in our command phase, we select one enemy unit within 12 inches of this model. That unit must take a battle shock test. If that unit fails that battle shock test, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, subtract 1 from the hit roll. Each time a friendly Tyranid's model makes an attack that targets that unit, add 1 to the hit roll. So it makes it more difficult for that model to deal damage. It makes it easier for us to deal damage to them. Now, just to go ahead and add more models for our opponents to shoot at, which can be relatively good for us and take advantage of that regeneration strategy that we talked about earlier, we're going to go ahead and add the maximum amount of Neurogaunts. So we're going to have 22 Neurogaunts, and we're going to group them together with something called a Neuro Tyrant. Now, the Neuro Tyrant has a flamer weapon, so it's a weapon that automatically hits, and it does 2 damage apiece. This model right here is really good at destroying Space Marines, guys, and when you're playing Warhammer, you best believe you're going to be playing against Space Marines a lot. And they also have an ability called Psychic Terror, that says if one or more Neuro Tyrants from your army are on the battlefield when you unleash Shadow in the Warp, subtract 1 from the battle shock test each enemy unit on the battlefield must take as a result. Now, Shadow in the Warp is a stratagem that basically forces your opponent to take a battle shock test, and I recommend that you activate Shadow in the Warp when you want to deny your opponent points. Remember, Tyranids is all about controlling space on the battlefield, applying debuffs to your opponent's models so your models can stay alive, and then at the same time, just denying your opponent points. A correctly timed Shadow in the Warp can absolutely win you a game of Warhammer, and keeping the Neuro Tyrant on the battlefield, giving them -1 to that leadership test when they become potentially battle shocked, can really swing the game in your favor. So in the end, to summarize this list, we're at 1990 points. We didn't reach exactly 2000, but we'll live with that. We don't need to get to exactly 2000 every time. I mean, technically we could remove the Tyrant Guard over here if we wanted to, and then we'd have 95 more points to kind of mess around with. But, you know, you do whatever you want to do. I like the idea of keeping my Hive Tyrant alive. Just keep in mind, the whole idea about this video is just for you guys to learn how to build a list by yourself. And I want you just to notice that I'm going to the abilities, seeing how the abilities overlap. And then when I play the game on the table, I'm making sure those models overlap their abilities with one another in combination with my stratagems. So it creates this mixture of incredibly powerful abilities at one time on the table. So if you guys like videos like this, let me know by liking this video and subscribing to this channel so that I know to make more videos just like this in the future, okay? Always remember, eat healthy, okay? Work out every single day. Most importantly, you guys got to remember to believe in yourself, all right? Peace out, everybody.